Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is week 1 of the STEMEY Anatomy Live classes, and we sent out the material on the chemical, cellular, and tissue levels of organization, as well as terminology this week on Google Classroom, and that is what we will be going over this lesson. So for those of you who have not attended the trial class, welcome. This is the anatomy class, and we're super excited to have you. My name is Arushi. I'm a sophomore at Lee High School in California. And if the other instructors could introduce themselves, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Yulia. I'm also a sophomore at Lee High School.
Hi, I'm Ashvi, and I'm a junior at Lee.
Okay. Okay. So the schedule for today, we're first going to be going over a little housekeeping things, and then you can ask like short questions next while we review each topic. And then we're going to actually get into like test review where you guys can ask questions that you were unsure of. And then, sorry, I never changed it. We're going to play Kahoot, not Quizlet, at the end, which is kind of a master Kahoot of all of the topics we covered this week.
Okay, so here is the Google Classroom code. Take a few seconds to just join, or you can take a screenshot. It's in the chat too, so you guys should join that. Okay, so today we're going to debrief the chemical, cellular, and tissue levels of organization, and we're going to end with terminology. And don't hesitate to ask any questions. Feel free to unmute if you feel comfortable, or you can ask in the chat too.
Okay, so starting off with the chemical level of organization. So as you may remember, atoms make up elements, and then elements make up compounds. And there are various elements that make up the human body. If you guys want to, feel free to type them in the chat. You can do it privately or publicly, just some of the elements that you remember that make up the human body. And then isotopes are varying elements, so there are versions of different elements. And then the periodic table of elements is useful for finding the atomic number, and it's the top number of the element. And then an atom is made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And these three things determine the atomic number, mass number, and the charge of the element. And then the elements also have shells, like in the picture, that the electrons are located on. And also one more thing that you might remember is electrons have a negative charge, protons have a positive charge, and neutrons are neutral.
So does anyone have any questions about this topic and what was covered in it during the week? Now is the time to ask like more general questions. If you have specific questions, we have a later time for that. Okay, so we can move on then. And you guys can put your questions in the chat anytime. We'll go over them, scroll through the chat and do that.
Okay, so moving on to the cellular level of organization. So electrical attraction creates bonds between molecules and compounds, and these are the things that create a molecule and a compound. And another question for the chat, do you guys remember the difference between a molecule and a compound? You can just put it in the chat again. And just a hint, is they're both 2 or more atoms, but there's a slight difference. And then while you're typing that in the chat, I'll go on. Ions are charged atoms. And then there are also various types of bonds like covalent, polar covalent, and hydrogen bonds.
Okay, so the next unit you guys covered was tissues. Does anybody know what the definition of a tissue is? I can go over it in brief because I know it takes a long time to type in the chat. So a tissue, tissues are a group of cells that were grown together, formed in the same embryonic region. So when you're forming in your mother's uterus, and they are found together. They are cells that are found together and have similar functions. So there are 4 types of tissues. So epithelium, they're basically large sheets of cells. They're avascular, and they are protective of your skin and organs because they are the outermost layer. So when you think about it, like your skin is the outermost layer of your body. So that is epithelial tissue. So some types of it are squamous, cuboidal, columnar cells, and then they can come in the cell layers, simple and stratified. Connective tissue, I think this one's pretty easy. So if anybody wants to put their function in the chat, feel free to do that. But they are made of bones and cartilage, and it transports blood and lymph. So the types of connective tissue, there is connective tissue proper, which is made of fixed cells. And if anybody knows the definition of fixed cells, feel free to put that in the chat, because a little hint is that fixed cells, think about their name, and that will give you a hint as to what they are. The next type of connective tissue is supportive connective tissue, which is made of your cartilage and bone, mainly for stability. So supportive stability, it provides support for your body. And then fluid connective tissue, which is just that blood and lymph. Fluid is like a liquid, so think of that. The next type of tissue is muscular tissue. So if anybody wants to put their function in the chat, feel free to do that. But they have, their function is to control all movement. If you know the 2 types of movement, you can also put that in the chat, just to be more interactive and show what you learned. So skeletal muscle, that's a first type. So these are the muscles that you think of, like when you think of muscles, like your biceps or your abs, or like these are the muscles that come straight to mind when you think of like, oh, I have muscles. And these control voluntary movement. So that's movement that you can think of, like, oh, I want to pick up this weight. So you go ahead and pick up the weight with your bicep or other muscles that you use to do that. And that's voluntary movement. And then smooth muscle its function is to control involuntary movement, which is muscle movement you don't think about, like your body just automatically does it, like breathing. You don't think about breathing constantly, but you still do it, which is involuntary movement. You don't really have any control over it. And the smooth muscle covers like the insides of your organs, so it helps in processes like digestion, like your intestines squeezing your fecal matter out. And then cardiac muscle, that forms the wall of your heart and is actually separate from other muscles. I'm not really sure why, but it pumps blood to, around the heart, like through the different sections of the heart. And it is again involuntary because you do not think of pumping your heart. So the fourth type of tissue is nervous tissue. This is made up of neurons, which allow for sensory and motor perception, which is just like the five senses. And then if something, like if you want to do something, you have to think about it. So your neurons work together to do whatever action you want to carry out. So damage is usually caused by inflammation. We all know what that feels like. So when you age, it's actually very interesting because tissues play a lot with your physical and, well, mostly physical, but also your like sense of clarity in your nervous system. Because when you think about it, nervous tissue is your neurons, and if your neurons lose clarity, you don't get to feel through your skin anymore. Like when someone touches you, you might feel it later or not as be sensitive. But aging can also make you lose a lot of muscle mass because muscle is also tissue, loss of bone mass because of the connective tissue. So aging is actually very destructive to tissues because your whole body is kind of made out of tissues. But a healthy lifestyle can combat these, like staying active. You can build up your bones and muscles. So if you have any questions on tissues, I know that was a lot. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. So terminology, this is kind of a step away from the more physical aspect of your body, but it is extremely important in terms of clinical practice and just knowing your way around the body. So the first, I guess the main point of terminology, all of it comes into anatomical position because that's like in reference to everything. It's relative to only one position. Like if you're lying down, your hand is still going to be superior to your foot, right? And if you're not lying down, so you're standing up, your hand is still going to be superior to your foot. So it's like a general way that you have to face that makes it so easy for doctors to get like the same description of you. And then you have directional terms, and these are just like telling which body part is in relationship to another one. So if anybody wants to put an example of any directional term in the chat, feel free to do so. And then body planes. Body planes are like how you cut the body. So you have different planes which have contain different organs. So it's just kind of a way to extremely generally separate your body. And then body cavities, these also section out your body, but more internally. So you have cavities containing organs, like your anterior body cavity would hold your abdominal, pelvic, and thoracic cavities. So they're like subsections, but they contain organs, so you can group them together more easily. I hope that made sense because now we will move on to questions. So if you have any, don't hesitate to ask in the chat or unmute yourself, and we will get to those. Yeah, so a body plane, it's kind of confusing to explain. I don't think I put an image of it on the, yeah, I did not put an image. But a body plane, if you can see me, it's essentially like, okay, so if you like cut me down this way, like if you put, I don't know, a piece of cardboard, or you just cut me in half this way, like that plane, like if you put a sheet through me, that's the plane in that direction, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question? I'm not really sure how to explain it. Okay, I'm gonna quickly go out of this. Here. Here, let's do some research. Yeah, so do you see this? Like if you put a plane through me, those are how you divide the body technically. I hope that answered your question. Okay. Not exactly like coordinates, but more like ways to divide. Yeah. That was a great question. Any other questions? Like clarifying questions or general questions? Anything? Because we're gonna play a Kahoot after this, and that is pretty long. So if you have any questions, now is the time. Okay, so there are no questions. So we'll move on to the Kahoot. And then if we have time after, we can go through more. All right, this is the game code. Yeah, so you guys can join and we will play. Instructors can join if you guys want to. You don't really need to, but I hope the other people, I hope you guys join because the Kahoot really goes into depth. All right, there are 4 of you. 5? Okay. Okay, I think that's everyone. So let's go. CT means connective tissue. All right. Good job to everybody that played. I'm not sure who first and third are, but as you can see, the Kahoot went way more in depth. So I'll ask again because we have a couple of minutes. Do you guys have any questions? Because I know the Kahoot went way more in depth. So you guys can unmute or ask in the chat. Anything you got wrong on the Quizlet test or on the Kahoot, any random questions you might have, we can answer for you. If you need anything like explained more in depth, or like a concept you don't get, or yeah, so you guys can ask in the chat privately or to everybody. You guys can ask about like the format of the class, how things are gonna go, anything of the sort. Sorry, Casey. I missed that. What would be good to know? Oh no, I was confused about the chat. I missed what you were talking about. What were you saying would be good to know? Oh, okay. So hopefully you guys have joined the Google Classroom at this point, because how it works is we are going to be sending out material. So for example, probably by the end of today sometime, I will post the next unit, which will be the skeletal system. I'll post the slideshow and like study material for that on Google Classroom. So you guys during the week will take notes or review and study and use a Quizlet and practice all of that stuff on your own. And then you will come to class on Sunday, next Sunday, with questions and anything you might want to know. And you can ask during the live, and we can also, we'll do like a similar format as today. We'll review it, and then we'll have time for questions and a game. So that is the format. So if you guys don't have any more questions, you can hop off the Zoom, and we hope to see you next week for the skeletal system. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you had a great time. But if you guys have questions, you can feel free to stick behind and keep asking in the chat. Yeah, so thank you. Bye. Bye. Yay. How do I stop recording?